The stares began the moment Miss Jane Hartwell adjusted her spectacles at the entrance to the Ashford Grand Ball. At 28, she had attended enough society events to recognize the familiar sequence. First came the sideways glances at her gray dress, then the assessment of her messy chignon, and finally the dismissive turning away of potential partners. Tonight was no different. She touched the leather portfolio tucked discreetly in her reticule, her only reminder that she was not what they believed her to be. "Miss Hartwell appears particularly ambitious this evening," Earl Frederick Ashford remarked loudly, his voice carrying across the marble floor. "One wonders what she hopes to accomplish in such modest attire." Jane didn't flinch. Let him preen in his expensive tailcoat. She knew exactly how much he'd borrowed to afford it. £15,000 to be precise. And she knew something else. The loan had been sold just yesterday. To her. Oh, astonishing, isn't it? But before we reveal how this incredible moment came to be, I have a question for you. Do you believe that destiny is written in the stars, or do we make it ourselves? Let me know in the comments below, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? I love reading you stories. Now, settle in, hit that subscribe button to join our family, and let me tell you the truth about what really happened. Earl Frederick was in rare form tonight, holding court at the center of the ballroom like a peacock among pigeons. The crystal chandeliers cast flattering shadows across his handsome features as he gestured with his champagne glass, his circle of admirers hanging on every cruel word. "The desperate spinsters grow bolder each season," he announced, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "Look at them, circling the edges like moths drawn to a flame they can never touch." His gaze swept the room and landed on Jane, standing near the refreshment table with her gray dress and sensible shoes. His smile sharpened into something predatory. "Ah, there's our dull gray mouse," he said, pointing with his glass. "Miss Hartwell, isn't it? Someone should tell her she'd be far more comfortable in the attic with the other forgotten things. At least there she wouldn't have to endure the disappointment of being overlooked season after season." Laughter erupted around him. Lady Pemberton tittered behind her fan. Lord Hastings nearly choked on his champagne. Even the orchestra seemed to pause, as if the musicians themselves were listening to the spectacle. Jane felt every eye in the ballroom turn toward her. The familiar heat of humiliation crept up her neck, but she had learned long ago not to give them the satisfaction of tears. Instead, she reached up and adjusted her spectacles with deliberate precision. Then she smiled, a small, cold curve of her lips that held secrets they couldn't begin to imagine. She picked up a glass of lemonade from the table, took a delicate sip, and met Frederick's gaze across the room. His laughter faltered for just a moment, something uncertain flickering in his eyes. But then his friends clapped him on the back, and the moment passed. Jane turned away, moving toward the terrace doors with measured steps. Let them laugh. Let Frederick bask in his cleverness and cruelty. She could afford to be patient for one more night. "Laugh while you can, my lord," she thought, her fingers tightening around her reticule where the portfolio lay hidden. Tomorrow is the first of the month. The cool night air greeted her as she stepped outside, and she allowed herself one genuine smile. By this time tomorrow, Earl Frederick Ashford would learn the most expensive lesson of his life. Never mock a woman whose mind is sharper than her dress is plain. Frederick woke to sunlight stabbing through his eyelids like hot needles. His mouth tasted of champagne and regret, his head pounding with the rhythm of last night's orchestra. He groaned and rolled over in his silk sheets, trying to remember how many bottles he'd emptied after the ball. "Go away," he muttered when he heard footsteps approaching. "My lord." Stevens, his butler, appeared at the bedside with his usual impeccable timing and irritating persistence. "A letter has arrived. It appears to be urgent." "Everything is urgent to you, Stevens." Frederick sat up, wincing as his head protested the movement. He reached for the letter on the silver tray, expecting another invitation or a tailor's bill he could postpone. The words "notice of foreclosure" stared back at him in bold, unforgiving print. Frederick's hangover evaporated. He read the letter once, then again, his hands beginning to tremble. The bank had sold his debt, all of it, to a private investor. Someone called the J.W. Trust. And that someone was calling in the loans. All 50,000 pounds of them. "This is impossible," he breathed. "The bank promised me until summer." "Is everything all right, my lord?" Stevens asked, though his expression suggested he already knew it wasn't. Frederick barely heard him. His eyes were locked on the deadline. 24 hours to pay in full or surrender the deed to Ashford Hall. His ancestral home. 300 years of family history. His mother's grave in the garden. Everything. He threw off the sheets and lunged for his wardrobe, his fingers fumbling with buttons and cravats. "Get the carriage ready. Now." "Where are we going, my lord?" "London. The financial district. I need to meet this J.W. Trust and explain." He stopped, swallowing hard. "Negotiate. I need to negotiate." As the carriage rattled toward London an hour later, Frederick's mind raced through possibilities. Who was J.W.? Another nobleman looking to humiliate him? A businessman with political ambitions? It didn't matter. He would charm them, promise them anything, offer them partnership in the estate's future profits. He was Earl Frederick Ashford. He always found a way. He just needed to meet this mysterious investor face to face. The offices of J.W. Trust occupied a corner building in London's financial district, all dark brick and narrow windows that seemed designed to intimidate. Frederick climbed the stairs with his heart hammering, trying to maintain the posture of a man who belonged in such places. The receptionist, a thin man with spectacles and an expression of profound boredom, barely glanced at him. "Lord Ashford? You may wait." "I have an appointment," Frederick protested. Nevertheless. So Frederick waited. 1 hour became 2. He paced the small anteroom, sat, stood, paced again. His cravat felt too tight. Sweat gathered at his temples. Through the heavy oak doors, he could hear nothing. No voices, no footsteps, only oppressive silence. By the 3rd hour, his arrogance had evaporated entirely, replaced by raw panic. What if they refused to see him? What if they'd already decided to take everything? Finally, mercifully, the doors opened. "Lord Ashford," the receptionist announced. "The director will see you now." Frederick straightened his waistcoat and stepped forward, preparing his most winning smile. The office beyond was exactly as intimidating as he'd feared. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, a massive desk that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. Behind it sat a high-backed leather chair, turned away toward the window. "Thank you for seeing me," Frederick began, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm certain we can reach an understanding regarding." The chair spun around. Miss Jane Hartwell sat behind the desk, her gray dress exchanged for a crisp black business suit. Her hair was pulled back severely, her spectacles perched on her nose. In front of her lay a stack of documents that Frederick recognized with sinking dread. His debts, his loans, his signed promises. His mouth fell open. No words came. Jane folded her hands on the desk, and that same small, cold smile from the ball curved her lips. "Good morning, Lord Frederick," she said, her voice perfectly pleasant. "I believe you owe me 50,000 pounds. You?" The word burst from Frederick's throat like a laugh and a curse combined. "This is absurd. You're a spinster, a wallflower. You can't possibly." Jane reached into her desk drawer and withdrew a thick leather portfolio. She opened it with deliberate care and removed a document, which she placed on the desk with a decisive thump that echoed in the quiet office. "The deed to Ashford Hall," she said simply. "As of yesterday, I hold full title to your ancestral home, your London townhouse, and the surrounding lands. Approximately 800 acres, I believe." Frederick stared at the document as if it might bite him. His name was there, his signature, everything legal and binding. How did you? Shall we review your debts, my lord? Jane didn't wait for an answer. She pulled out another sheet, adjusting her spectacles as she read. 15,000 to your tailor in Bond Street. 8,000 in gambling debts at White's. 12,000 for that magnificent thoroughbred you purchased last spring, the one that went lame after 2 months. And another 15,000 in various wines, entertainments, and what I can only describe as general excess. Each number landed like a physical blow. Frederick's face drained of color. You see, Jane continued, her voice never rising above that pleasant, conversational tone. While you were holding court last night, mocking desperate spinsters and dull gray mice, I was doing what I do best, managing money, and buying up the debts of arrogant lords who mistake cruelty for wit. She leaned forward, and her eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes he'd never bothered to notice, locked onto his. Does this mouse look dull to you now, my lord? Frederick's hands clenched into fists. You vindictive little. Careful, Jane interrupted. I'm the only thing standing between you and complete ruin. I'd suggest you measure your words more carefully than you did at the ball. The silence stretched between them. Frederick could hear his own ragged breathing, the tick of the clock on the mantel, the distant sounds of London's financial district churning with business he'd never understood or cared to understand. What do you want? He finally asked, his voice hoarse. Jane sat back in her chair. I'll offer you a deal. You can keep Ashford Hall. Your family name remains intact. Your mother's grave stays undisturbed. In exchange for what? Marriage, Jane said simply. To me. Not for love. Let's not insult each other's intelligence. A legal arrangement that gives me control of the estate and allows you to maintain your title and position. We'll be partners after a fashion. You want to buy a husband? No, my lord. I already bought one. Now I'm simply informing him of the terms. Frederick signed the contract with hands that shook from fury rather than fear. Each stroke of the pen felt like surrendering another piece of his pride. But what choice did he have? Debtor's prison? Exile? Watching his family's legacy auctioned off piece by piece? The wedding took place 3 weeks later in a small chapel with only the required witnesses present. No flowers, no music, no celebration. Jane wore a simple blue dress. Frederick wore his resentment like a second skin. I now pronounce you man and wife, the vicar intoned, and Frederick felt the trap snap shut around him. They returned to Ashford Hall in separate carriages. When Frederick entered his own home, he found Jane already there, standing in the great hall with the household ledgers spread across the table. I'll be taking the master suite, she announced without preamble. You may have the east wing rooms. They're quite comfortable. This is my house, Frederick said through gritted teeth. Jane looked up from the ledgers, one eyebrow raised. Actually, it's my house. You are simply the guest. A titled guest, certainly, but a guest nonetheless. The sooner you understand that, the more pleasant our arrangement will be. You can't possibly expect. I expect you to behave as if you have some sense, Jane interrupted. Your gambling days are over, Frederick. Your drinking, your spending, your endless parade of wasteful excess. This estate has been hemorrhaging money for years. I intend to stop the bleeding. She returned to her ledgers, dismissing him with her indifference more effectively than any words could have. Frederick stalked away, rage burning in his chest. But as days turned to weeks, he found himself watching her despite himself. She worked from dawn until late evening, poring over accounts, meeting with tenants, negotiating with suppliers. She knew every expense, every income source, every opportunity for improvement. One evening, he found her in the library, papers spread across the desk, her spectacles pushed up into her hair as she rubbed her tired eyes. You need proper lighting, he heard himself say. Jane looked up, startled. What? For the accounts. The lamp here is insufficient. You'll ruin your eyes. He paused, something twisting uncomfortably in his chest. You're brilliant at this. The estate management. It was the first civil thing he'd said to her since the wedding. Jane studied him for a long moment, surprise flickering across her features. Thank you, she said quietly. Frederick fled the library, but the image followed him. Jane surrounded by papers, working to save his inheritance while he'd done nothing but spend it. Something like respect, grudging, unwelcome, but undeniable, began to take root in his chest. 6 months into their arrangement, Frederick stopped gambling. Not because Jane forbade it, but because sitting across the card table at White's had lost its appeal. The other players seemed suddenly shallow, their jokes crude, their carelessness with money almost offensive. He found himself spending more time in the estate office, watching Jane work. She taught him how to read the ledgers, how to spot inefficiencies, how to negotiate with tenants fairly. She never mocked his ignorance, only explained patiently until he understood. She changed too. The gray dresses disappeared, replaced by deeper colors, burgundy, forest green, midnight blue. She still wore her spectacles, but now her hair was arranged beautifully instead of hastily pinned. Frederick caught himself staring at the elegant line of her neck, the way lamplight caught in her eyes when she smiled at some successful calculation. Then Mr. Sterling arrived. He was a banker from London, handsome in that polished way that spoke of old money and easy confidence. He called on a Tuesday morning, ostensibly to discuss investment opportunities, but Frederick heard them laughing together in the drawing room and something hot and ugly twisted in his gut. Miss Hartwell, or should I say Lady Ashford, you haven't changed a bit, Sterling said, his voice warm. Still the sharpest mind in London. You flatter me, Thomas. Thomas. They were on first-name terms. Frederick found himself pacing in the hallway like a jealous schoolboy. When Sterling finally left, after 2 hours Frederick had counted, he burst into the drawing room. Who was that? He demanded. Jane looked up from her papers, surprise clear on her face. Mr. Sterling. We worked together at my father's firm before he passed. Why? 2 hours is rather excessive for a business meeting. We were catching up. I haven't seen him in years. Catching up? Frederick repeated, his voice sharp. Laughing together. Thomas. Understanding dawned in Jane's eyes, followed by something that might have been amusement. She stood, crossing to where he stood rigid with anger he couldn't quite name. Are you jealous, husband? She asked softly. Don't be ridiculous. Because if you are, you should know that Thomas Sterling is happily married with 3 children. We're friends. Nothing more. Frederick felt heat rising in his face. I'm not jealous. I simply think. You simply realized that other men might find me interesting, Jane finished. That perhaps the dull gray mouse has value beyond her account books. You're not dull, Frederick said before he could stop himself. You've never been dull. I was a fool at that ball. A cruel, arrogant fool who couldn't see past his own pride. The words hung between them. Jane's expression softened, vulnerability flickering across her features before she could hide it. I don't just need your money anymore, Jane, Frederick continued, the truth pouring out of him now. I want. But he couldn't finish. Couldn't say what he'd only just realized himself. That somewhere between the ledgers and the late-night conversations about crop rotation, he'd fallen in love with his wife. The annual ball returned, as it always did, marking the anniversary of Frederick's greatest mistake. This year, everything was different. Jane descended the grand staircase in an emerald gown that seemed to capture and reflect every light in the ballroom. Her hair was artfully arranged, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. She'd left her spectacles behind, and without them, her eyes seemed even more striking. The crowd gasped. Whispers rippled through the assembly like wind through grass. Is that Miss Hartwell? Lady Ashford now, don't you know? He only married her for the money, obviously. Poor thing probably paid him to take her name. Frederick heard every whisper, felt every speculative glance. He watched Jane's expression carefully, saw the moment she heard them too, saw the old hurt flicker across her features before she could hide it. He couldn't bear it. Frederick strode to the center of the ballroom and raised his hand. "Stop the music," he commanded. The orchestra faltered into silence. Every eye turned to him. "1 year ago tonight," Frederick began, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "I stood in this very spot and committed an act of extraordinary cruelty. I mocked a woman for the crime of being plain. I called her a gray mouse. I suggested she belonged in the attic with other forgotten things." Jane had frozen on the stairs, her eyes wide. "What I didn't know," Frederick continued, "was that the woman I mocked owned every inch of ground I stood on, that she had more intelligence in her smallest finger than I possessed in my entire arrogant head, that she would save me from myself and my own destructive pride." He walked to the stairs, climbed until he stood beside Jane, and took her hand. She was trembling. "She owns this estate," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But more importantly, she owns my heart. Everything good in my life now exists because of her brilliance, her patience, and her inexplicable mercy. Lady Jane Ashford is the finest person I've ever known, and I spend every day trying to deserve her." He turned to Jane, speaking now only to her, though everyone could hear. "I'm sorry. For that night, for every cruel word, for being too blind to see you. I love you, not your money, not your mind, though God knows I admire both. Just you." Tears glittered in Jane's eyes. "You love me, desperately, completely, far more than I deserve." She laughed, a sound caught between tears and joy. "You really are an idiot sometimes." "I know, but you're my idiot." She touched his face, her fingers gentle. "And I love you too, even when you're being insufferably dramatic." Frederick kissed her then, in front of the entire assembly, and didn't care who watched or whispered. When they finally broke apart, the ballroom erupted in applause. Some genuine, some merely polite, but for once Frederick didn't care what anyone thought. He had Jane. Everything else was just noise. On their first anniversary, Jane presented Frederick with a leather portfolio. He recognized it immediately, the one she'd carried in her reticule that fateful night at the ball. "Open it," she said quietly. Inside lay the deed to Ashford Hall. Across it, in Jane's precise handwriting, were the words, "Paid in full." Frederick stared at the document, unable to speak. "We're partners now," Jane said. "True partners. Equals. I don't want you to stay because you're trapped or because you owe me. I want you to stay because you choose to. Jane, I know you love me, but I also know what it costs a man's pride to be dependent on his wife. So this is yours again, free and clear. If you want to leave, you can." Frederick set down the deed and pulled her into his arms. "I'm not going anywhere. Not because of the estate or the money or what anyone thinks. Because of you. Only you." "We're really partners then?" Jane asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "In everything. Forever." That night they opened the ball together. The same ballroom, the same orchestra, but everything transformed. Jane wore emerald again. Frederick wore his finest coat. But this time, when they danced, there were no whispers, no mockery, no cruel laughter. The ugly spinster and the arrogant Earl had vanished, burned away by love and humility and hard-won understanding. Only Jane and Frederick remained. Imperfect, complicated, learning together how to be better than they'd been. As they spun across the floor, Frederick caught sight of their reflection in the gilt mirrors. A couple who'd found each other in the most unlikely way, through cruelty transformed into grace. "What are you thinking?" Jane asked. "That I'm the luckiest fool in England." She laughed, the sound pure joy. "You are a fool. But you're my fool. Always, he promised. He thought he was mocking a mouse that night, but he had awakened a lioness. And luckily for him, the lioness was forgiving. 5 years later, Ashford Hall thrummed with life and laughter. The estate flourished under Jane and Frederick's joint management. Its accounts healthy, its tenants prosperous, its future secure. In the library, Jane's favorite room, 3 figures bent over the massive oak desk. Frederick held their daughter Emma on his lap while Jane pointed to columns of numbers in the ledger. "See here, darling," Jane explained to the serious-faced 4-year-old. "This is income. This is expenses. You must always know the difference." "Why, Mama?" "Because knowledge is power," Jane said, kissing her daughter's dark curls. "And power means you never have to depend on anyone's permission to be yourself." Frederick watched them, his heart full. Emma had inherited Jane's sharp eyes and his stubborn chin, a formidable combination. "She's too young for accounting lessons," he protested mildly. "I was reading ledgers at 5, Jane countered. "Of course you were." Frederick shifted Emma to face her. "But before we continue with numbers, let me tell you something important, little one. Never judge a book by its cover. And never, ever judge a lady by her dress." Emma frowned, considering this wisdom. "Why not?" "Because your father once made that mistake," Jane said, sharing a knowing look with Frederick over their daughter's head. "And he nearly lost everything that mattered." "But he didn't," Emma said confidently. "Because you saved him." "We saved each other," Frederick corrected gently. "That's what partners do." Later, after Emma had been tucked into bed with a story about brave knights and clever princesses, Frederick found Jane standing before the portrait that hung above the library fireplace. She'd had it commissioned last year. Herself at the desk, quill in hand, spectacles perched on her nose, the ledgers open before her. The artist had captured something essential: the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet power in her posture, the slight smile that suggested secrets and strength. "Do you ever think about that night?" Jane asked without turning around. "The ball." Frederick came to stand beside her. "Every day. Regrets. Only that I was such an idiot." He slipped his arm around her waist. "But if I'd been smarter, I might never have provoked you into buying my debts. And then where would we be?" "You'd probably be in debtor's prison," Jane said practically. "And I'd be a wealthy spinster with too many cats. Thank God for my arrogance then." She laughed and leaned into him, and they stood together in comfortable silence, looking at the portrait of the woman who'd saved them both. Saved Frederick from ruin, saved Jane from a life unlived. Outside, the sun set over Ashford Hall's rolling acres. Inside, the library held the history of their unlikely love. Ledgers and memories, cruelty transformed into kindness, pride broken and rebuilt into partnership. The gray mouse had become a lioness. The arrogant Earl had become a man worthy of her. And together, they'd built something neither could have imagined that night at the ball. A marriage of equals. A love story written in balance sheets and second chances. The portrait smiled down at them, cool poised, ready to write the next chapter. The end. What part of this journey touched your heart today? If you'd enjoy more historical love stories filled with healing and hope, let me know below. Please hit the like button. It really helps us share these stories with the world. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a moment. Thank you for spending your precious time here. Your next beautiful story is waiting on the screen.